Croeso I Gŵyl Haf, and welcome to a little festival wrap-up. My name is Caitlin Van Buren, and I am the director of the festival. And with me today, I have sort of the partner, like my partner in crime, for all things work-related.
Hi, I'm Will. I think my official title is Creative Associate, or Creative Associate.
I
Uh,
mean, that's what we
I'll get
decided.
promoted to Creative Director one day.
If you're well behaved, if you're well behaved. So what we wanted to do to sort of wrap up this festival is to just sort of talk through the events that we've had this year and to pair some, if you're looking, it's kind of a thing for like recommendations. So if you're looking for, obviously, you know, we've arranged things in days for a reason. So there is already a pairing of each day. So each day starts with a lunchtime talk from a publisher or blog, followed by a children or students talk. And then there is an early evening talk and a late evening talk. And so there is this structure to them already, but we also wanted to pull out a few threads and strands in case you would like to explore them in a different way. So this is kind of going to be our personal links, I think, between talks.
Yeah, I think so. And it'd be interesting to see who agrees or disagrees, or if you've noticed any themes, let us know. It's that funny thing, isn't it, where sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah, and also events that like got filmed together can go together because like in your head you were still continuing the conversation from earlier in the day, so I'm like, they all link.
What was the theme? A theme that kept on coming back, and I'm now going to struggle to remember exactly which talks this was in, but I know that it started in Polly's talk and continued into Manon's talk, and a couple of others. Was you're a different person in a different language.
Yeah,
And that can be really dramatic, actually.
there's actually some really interesting different perspectives on whether you're a different person in a different language, because it comes up. So in Polly's book, I think probably as a festival it was first brought up in Polly's talk as well, like chronologically. And in her book she quotes some research where they studied some Japanese women living in San Francisco, and they literally had different goals of life in Japanese and in English, and they said their aims were different. They were like, you know, essentially what you would not recognize these people, and she was talking about how that is true. So that sort of started off. And then actually a person who I remember complicating that idea was Carol Lewis. She said, so that would be in Horror and Liberation, 2 Welsh novels. So she then said that she actually like bought into that too much, that she'd actually like bought into the idea that you were a different person in the different languages too far, and that had been a bit of a barrier for her and translation and for sort of like having her books in 2 languages, and that actually, like, you know, she was like, there is this vast difference but also there is something unifying. She sort of she wrote that back.
Absolutely.
And then
Go on.
then Manon brings it up as well again in Welsh publishing and self-translation.
But also her book, it's not just herself maybe that's a different person when she speaks Welsh, but that her book reads a lot darker in Welsh. So it kind of extends beyond the author, which is nice.
No, I thought that was so interesting. I thought that was interesting as well. I was actually rewatching a bit of that just now. She said her book seems darker. The reason she thinks her book is darker in Welsh than it is in English is because like there is context and history and cultural interaction in the Welsh version of the text that links with these other perhaps darker heritages too, or artifacts of culture too, and that you know, that also there was this sense of like, because everybody has more or less the same reference points as to like what the Welsh landscape looks like, that was another reason it was darker, almost because she had to explain less. There's more gloss in the English, so because she had to explain less, it's darker somehow. Yeah. That's definitely come back loads of times, and I'm sure that's actually in so many more talks, slipped in here and there.
And I think to a degree it goes back to this kind of ultimate question that we've been trying to answer, which is, well, not answer, but just probe, which is like translation as an art form.
Yeah.
And actually, if there are these noticeable differences, then the created object, whatever it is, book, text, is create. If it's, you know, if it's, I don't know, it sounds so simplistic, but if it's different, then it's created, and those differences go more than just, you know, this is hello in Welsh and this is hello in English. This is actually how the book feels, how it comes to an English reader versus a Welsh reader.
Why don't we pull out two strands? One that is translation as an art, like specifically looking at that, and then the other is like translation from a very practical standpoint. I feel like those are two strands that are also good. So the first one of like translation from a practical viewpoint is definitely considering career as a translator with Rebecca D. Weld. That's definitely a strong practical one. I think another practical one, Daniel Harm's got a bit of practicalness to him, as does Annie McDermott in translating femicide. That's got the second half of that one's quite practical.
Tanya Huntington.
Yeah, that is quite practical. I feel like that one doesn't have as much of a discussion of like finances. She's got a bit of discussion about like having to translate.
Oh, sorry, you're talking about living as a translator as opposed to sort of actually translating.
Yeah, because Tanya talks about having to do non-literary translation and how her life is balanced out, but she doesn't talk so much about like how to make translation pay. It's not unconnected, but yeah. What about translation creatively? Like, what do you think of the standout ones are that just highlight, like, actually maybe it's Tanya Huntington, you know, that highlights like sort of the extent to which word for word translation can never be meaning for meaning translation.
Robin Myers, I think, gets into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, Aranava hit the last day hard.
Aranava did our festival for us, and it only took him an hour. It's taken us 16 days, whatever it's been.
12. Know how long the length of your own festival is. There's quite a lot. Another thing to pull out is reading lists. I would say that Simone de Beauvoir, that's a reading list of just Simone de Beauvoir. Translating Women's got a bit of a reading list element to it.
Alessia Mackenzie with the Caribbean Translation Project.
Brazilian women writers got a bit of a reading list element.
I certainly went away and put the two Latin American epic poems on my reading list after The Adventures of China Iron. I think those are the only other two books mentioned in that talk, although there might be a few other Charco books.
Yeah, I was literally going to say any of the ones that sort of is a talk with a press, so Comma, New Directions, Tilted Axis, and other stories. Those ones I came away with like a couple new ones I wanted to buy from each of those as well.
I think actually Paige as well, Paige Anion Morris, the early Korean translator, talking about all of this speculative Korean sci-fi.
Yeah.
Stuck into that at some stage.
Quite. What?
Tanash.
Oh yeah. I don't know if Tanash had. There is quite a lot of reading list in there, isn't there?
Actually, if people are looking for a reading list, a better place to go than Tanash's talk is the website that he helps run and helps set up, called Reading Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Very creatively named talk, that one. And that is a that is a database. That is a database of Zimbabwe literature from all kinds of there's poetry, there's non-fiction, there's fiction, translated in different languages, some originally sort of Anglophone, and that's just a resource that I think you could spend many happy hours poring over.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to link together. This is more of an obvious link, and this is like academic talks. So I just like, I think that, you know, we really enjoy speaking to academics. And in particular, the first one we had was Rachel Sutton Spence on sign language, literature, and poetry. And then we had another academic that day in the Adventures of China Iron.
Two academics.
Two academics. You're quite right. Who's the next academic? Then we had a break from academics. Then we had Brazilian women writers. Then we had Tanash, Mushak Haven too, who then we had Laura Henshold, and Margot Eckenberg.
Yeah.
Those are our like academics talks, and I think that like those are all fantastic. All of those are brilliant.
And that's another aim of the festival as well, isn't it? To talk about academia and bring academia in such a way that is accessible and understandable if you don't know anything about Brazilian women's literature, which I don't. Yeah, or about any of the academic talks.
Another thing to pull out would be talks that you knew nothing about before then. If we're not, obviously you don't know anything about the academics talks, but what talks, when we programmed them and we'd done the research and we knew who we wanted to pick, what talks do you think you were like still surprised by?
All of the sign language talks.
Yes.
I didn't know anything about BSL, Libras. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing about those talks or any of these talks. So that's definitely one of them. I mean, I think it's less about what don't you know anything about, because I think we put this festival on because we know a little bit about a lot of things within translation. But there are certainly an awful lot of talks, you know, with Sinoist and with Nikki Helen Wang, Chinese children's literature and Chinese literature in general. I've never read an awful lot of that. So those were a couple of really interesting talks, because it's not new, you know, it's not completely new to me. It's also not, you know, I don't know how many Chinese books I've read, but not a lot. And so these talks were really interesting. And actually as well, I don't read any, you're quite big on your YA and your children's literature, but I don't read any children's literature or any YA books. So, you know, any of those talks, which is also the Pfizer Gwene talk.
Yeah, Pfizer Gwene, Lawrence Schimmel, Lawrence Schimmel's second talk, the inclusive children's books talk, and then definitely Paige. We touch on YA as well, and
you go into it with Daniel Mann?
Yeah, a little bit, not extensively. Chinese children's literature.
I'll tell you the other place, with Teja from Tilted Axis.
Yes, oh my god, that was really interesting, because I had the realization in the interview that Tilted Axis publishes a lot of YA, and like I hadn't thought of it that way before, and then all of a sudden Teja and I both went yeah, definitely. I was going to pull, I forgot what I was going to pull together then. I had a really good idea. What was it? Come back to me. Okay.
Just a very quick one. Talks about capitalism is all of them. So if you were looking for any talks with a critique of capitalism, I think there isn't a single talk where you can do a capitalist, late capitalism, whatever critique analysis. It comes up a lot. And
Agreed.
that is, I think, as a stance, as a political stance that this festival has, we do not like capitalism. We think it is bad. So
yes,
enjoy those talks.
I
We are festive.
completely agree. I completely agree. Every talk, I think that also the idea, the intention is that as you layer the talks together and reach a sort of intersectional point, that's like the intersectional wedge in capitalism. Like that's kind of the idea, that actually all of these talks are a critique of capitalism and an understanding of capitalism, when you put them together and think about them collectively.
I think the one talk where it's maybe most explicitly spoken about is with Nicola from
Yeah.
Apple Story. So
Yeah.
that's you're
Well,
particularly interested.
Nicola volunteered herself straight up. She was like, I'm going to talk about how like the 2008 financial crash impacted publishing, and how like difficult it is to sort of to have your values, and to also know that the best thing you can do is to like make changes where you possibly can, like being an independent press, publishing more diverse voices, publishing, you know, books that you believe in. But the act of publishing itself obviously is inherently capitalist, and the sort of tension there of like doing good work but also not, because, you know.
Yes, I think there's Tainan Kagane also touches on that in the New Directions talk.
mm, mm. I remembered what my good one was. It was about archiving. Kanash got me thinking about archiving. And I actually think there are quite a few talks that function in the way that he thinks about archiving, which is sort of, you know, I think that an obvious one is Christine Watkins, on sort of why we all need local folk tales and Gwent folk tales. That's a sort of archiving, just because folk tales are something that like, I mean, an interesting point is like what are folk tales, and like this extent to which myths and legends and things we might think of as folk tales are actually like another generation's folk tales, but still like she is archiving a previous generation's folk tales for the modern day. So that one feels like archiving. Are there any others that stand out to you that feel a bit like archives?
I think archiving is so broad because, as you were saying, it's like I don't know how to say this in such a way that isn't very pretentious, but there's a lot just about like is not every novel to a degree an archive? Can you just run with me for a minute because I've never thought this before. So just
Oh
there.
well, this is the perfect avenue for a brand new thought.
This is Caitlin. This is how we have our phone calls. Is I'll just throw something out there and be like, "Now let me explain for the next 20 minutes." No, but I suppose I think the talks that I know best are the ones that I hosted. So I'm just going to use those as examples. Is Seduced to an extent an archive? Seduces by Desiree. An archive of loads of things, but an archive of language, an archive of Caribbean funeral rites. You know, Barbara Jenkins, an archive of Creoles and how they differ in, you know, these exist in the novels. I don't know. That is, I'm going to watch myself say that back and just think, God, what a pretentious piece of work you are.
It's when you say, it's in, I think something that is really stuck from Barbara's talk, interestingly, is her concept of there are basically as many Creoles as there are people, that sort of like each, you know, just in the same way that like that would also apply, right? There are as many variations of English as there are like English speakers, right? Like everybody's language is unique to them, but basically what stuck with that concept from her talk was this idea that your age, your exposure to other cultures, your friend group, all these sorts of things create each a different Creole. And I think that that's what's been archived by Barbara, is this like that she's given each character a voice that is sort of representative of the Creole that they would have spoken, that their sort of contemporary peers would have spoken. Yeah. I think there's a few others that are like archives. I think that Horror and Liberation, two Welsh novels, is like archives. I think that both of those books archive a changing landscape and a sort of lived Welsh experience that is shrinking and disappearing, and will, in my lifetime, perhaps only be archived.
Only exist in archives.
I do, and in memory, it's kind of like, yeah, I think both of those are sort of an encapsulation of trying to like hold still and remember these people and these lives and sort of way of life as well. And it's not even it's certainly not in a romantic sense of history. Like the people she is archiving are the people of the last 40 years. They're not the people of the last 200 years. Like there are some elements, you know, it's not sort of like, oh, like this Welsh life that is completely changing. It's like this Welsh life that is always changing.
Yeah.
And this iteration is now also fading.
When you put it like that, and I don't know as well as you will about the kind of romantic historicising, but actually what I was thinking of was the Nelly Campbell, Cartucho and My Mother's Hands. It sounds like it's a similar sort of process of archiving.
Oh, that's so.
I mean, maybe you'll disagree.
What's the point about archiving for me from that book is that she has archived from a woman's perspective. She has archived the Mexican Revolution and remembered and accounted for the Mexican Revolution in a way that no other history book does. She's not been like, and this is, you know, like she's not sort of going into the she's not going into Ponte Villa and Zapatistas. She's not giving you that detail. Like Ponte Villa is there, but like you are actually just getting all of that fades into the background. Like the actual like what is going on is very unimportant. What is really important is what is being experienced. Yeah, definitely. Any other themes that you want to pull out? Anything that's like calling to you?
I'm going to go for a really boring one.
Yeah.
Poetry readings.
Oh my
Not that
God,
I think poetry readings are boring, but just that it's obvious. So
I was
yeah.
going to suggest poetry, funnily enough. Come
Yeah.
on then, let's talk about.
Shoshani,
Yeah.
Mena, and myself, a sort of trinity, if you will.
You went there. Also, like we could talk about poetry more broadly. Like those are the three like explicitly poetry readings, but you also have Sergius Seeks Bacchus is all about poetry. Then huh?
David Austin.
David Austin is all about poetry. The Adventures of China Iron, that is based on a poem, and there is quite a lot of poetry in the book as well.
I'm just having a look.
Sign language poetry.
Yeah.
You could almost say that that was a performance. We watched some performances in that one.
Definitely we did. 100%.
We certainly did.
And
If you
that's it.
If you had to pull out two talks that you would tell a stranger to go watch first, not knowing anything, obviously like when like friends ask or whatever, we tend to like tailor what talks we would recommend to them based on like we know of their interests. But say we don't know anything, what two talks would you pull out to give someone a first taster?
First one, sign language literature with Rachel Sutton Spence.
Agreed.
I think that's fairly, yeah. I think
yeah.
the of us would probably agree on that. And then the second one, I'm really struggling. I'm just looking at the list now, and I'm really struggling to pick one because Curveball, or not curveball, you'll probably expect me to say this. I would recommend the Christine Watkins talk. I'd recommend the talk about folklore.
That is a curveball, because I wouldn't say that is like our standard programming.
No, exactly. It's not very of what you find at Gŵyl at all. Maybe it's because Rachel Sutton Spence is so Gŵyl that I'm okay with being a bit less sort of close to home on the second talk. But for me, that was just one of the talks of the festival. I think I have a real personal interest actually, but something I hadn't appreciated before that talk and really came away struck by was just how important local folklorists are, and they look like different things and they tell different stories. And you mentioned, this earlier, and maybe they're telling another generation's stories as well. But I think that was one of the talks that sort of will change how I interact with folklore and change how I interact with those books and those histories.
Before I say mine, that's a theme. What's changed? And again, the answer for me is sign language, the sign language talks, the British Sign Language talks, because that will change how I interact with visual and sign languages forever now. I have learned an entirely new perspective to look at those languages and to understand them a bit more, not in not in their entirety by any means. I think the other things that have like changed my perspective on something, not perspective, but like have sort of changed how I will interact with something, is probably Barbara Jenkins' talk. Again,
she's just great.
Yeah,
just so much love for Barbara.
Norman, Sergius Seeks Bacchus, Norman Eriksson Passeribu.
Probably the longest post-filming debrief that we had, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely true. And definitely the one that like affected me most. That sort of left me thinking for a long time afterwards.
I think that was an interesting talk from the perspective of Tiffany is there as well, being a translator and just understanding because in Tiffany and Norman, you see one side of the translator's relationship that appears to be fairly rare, if not unique. And then with the Fiona and Iona talk, with the Adventures of China Iron, it was a lot more that the relationship was much closer between them as co-translators, rather than working really, really closely with the author. And I think this is something that's interesting just across the festival. We've seen, and it's in other talks as well, we've seen the kind of how different relationships can be.
Yes. And then also like there's the relationship sometimes with a text where the author's passed. That's like a whole nother dimension. That is actually a really interesting thing to explore. That is definitely something that like sort of what does that relationship look like and how does it get explored? Probably reading Zimbabwe again is a bit of one that has like changed how I will approach things as well. I really liked what he said about like how on reading Zimbabwe, like they don't have like any of the actual book or whatever. They are just actually documenting rights and copyright and who owns those texts, and this idea that actually there are some people out there who do not own a copy of their own book, and who I thought that was really interesting. The two talks that I would recommend and pull out, and I won't pick the same two as you because I think my draw is to also go for sign language literature and poetry, and I think that's like that's probably what I would.
Rachel, isn't it?
Yeah, it is probably what I would go with first, but I'm going to pick a different two, and I am going to pick 50 Sounds with Polly Barton, and then Arunava's lecture in 2 parts from the last day. So that's from the first day to the last day, interestingly enough, or the second day to the last day even. And I think the thing that's going on there is that I think both of those talks encapsulate a lot of the conversations that I really want to have, I would like to be having around language. And I think that 50 Sounds is a book that is an encapsulation of Gŵyl Haf, and then I think that Aranava's talk is an encapsulation of Gŵyl Haf. And I think that if you were looking for a flavour of like what conversations we hope to carry forward, that those are probably the two to go for.
There's a lot of I think we are quite in one channel a lot of the time with these conversations that Polly and Aaron are having. And then we have all of these lovely talks that complement that conversation so well. And actually that channel is stronger for all the talks around the outside.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of putting it. That is indeed. And so I guess really all that's left to sort of say from me and Will is just the massivest of thank yous. I think it comes from two places. You know, there's a thank you to everyone who's spoken, and then there's a thank you to everyone watching. It's yeah, we can't thank you enough. For taking the time to engage with the programme and the festival.
Yeah, absolutely. And we couldn't do it without you, and we wouldn't do it without you. So stick around, because this is a deep old well.
We've got entire Will's literature to get through, everyone. Send in your suggestions. Let us know who you'd like us to like consider sort of putting on and talking about. We're always open for ideas. And yeah, it's been really fun, hasn't it, this year?
It has. It's been so different. It's been so different this year to last year. And I'm sure next year will be different again.
I think so. I think that is a joy of being a small independent festival, is that each year is so characterized by like its particular circumstances, like our particular circumstances, the festival's particular circumstances, everything like that. Well,
I would say one other thing, actually, one final thing, which is not but just go and find small festivals, you know, because me and Caitlin put this on, and Caitlin in particular puts this on out of nothing. We get no money. We have paid to put this on. You know, we've done this out of our own pockets. We do this because we love translated literature, and we want to have conversations that we don't think enough literature festivals are having. I would just recommend, whatever it is, doesn't have to be literature, arts, cinema, whatever you're interested in, science, just go and find your local small festival and just show up for them, because if they appreciate it half as much as we do, then you're going to be spreading a lot of love and
oh my god, each view for us, like every single view,
we talk about every single one of you.
Each view is so like amazing for us. Yeah, completely. And sort of I've actually stumbled along a lot of sort of like in this process, and like in sort of you know, finding them for ourselves, like as sort of doing research. I found quite a few, and that's been really nice. So they are all out there to be Googleable,
and more as well online, you know.
yeah.
So don't just focus on what's down your road or what's in your neighborhood or in your city or town. You know, go and see if podcasts have any online stuff if you're not in Trinidad. See, because I bet you anything they do.
Yeah.
Have a look.
So thank you so much for watching, and the hugest thanks from both Will and I to everybody involved in the festival, and involved means watching too, very much to both of us. We are sending you our love.
Thank you, and see you next year.
See you next year. Bye.